The battle over the data in your computer is on. Hello, everyone. I'm François Picard. Welcome to the France 24 debate. Welcome to the information age, where everything from whether you hit like on a political cause or click on a cat video, every move you make matters. Amid growing momentum for a U.S. ban on China-owned TikTok or pushback against Huawei's rollout of 5G, now comes privacy concerns of a different kind. The European Court of Justice striking down the Privacy Shield Agreement, under which Europe's information can be stored on U.S. servers. A deal worked out in the wake of Edward Snowden's revelations about Washington's mass spying on users with or without the consent of Silicon Valley tech giants. Lipstick on a pig, say critics. Where does it now leave the likes of Facebook? The striking down of that privacy shield. The ruling clearly implies that the U.S. has to change its own data privacy laws. But more regulation is hardly the order of the day in Washington these days. Does the European Union have the power and the will to do what the U.S. federal government won't? And finally, how much should we really care or worry? Privacy advocates say a lot, but how do businesses and the general population as a whole feel about it? Today in the France 24 debate, the battle over data protection, and joining us, Alla Krunitskita from Vienna. Alla Krunitskita, you are a member of None of Your Business, NYOB. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Francois, for having me. I work as a data protection lawyer at NOIB, and I'm here to briefly explain what the consequences of the recent European Court's decision for the digital world are. So,
yeah, we'll be asking you about that in a moment. I also just want to say hello first to Axel Lemaire, global head of Terra Numerata, former minister, French minister of digital innovation. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Also joining us from the French capital is Alex Blumenrosen, attorney specializing in litigation, arbitration, and privacy disputes. Thanks for being with us.
Nice to be here, Francois. Nice to see you.
We have a cryptologist in our midst. Nadim Kabesi is with us as well from Paris. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
And from Honolulu, Hawaii, John Hemings, associate professor at the Asia Pacific Center for Securities Studies. You're also doing consultancy work, you say, for the Defense Department.
No, the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies is a regional center, which is part of the Defense Department. So I'm speaking, however, in my personal capacity, and I do not represent U.S. government policy.
All right, the record has been stated there. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter. The hashtag is F24debate. Yeah, the ruling that was put out last Thursday is known as Max Schrems 2. That sounds a bit technical if you don't know who Max Schrems is, but Alla Krunitskita, you know perfectly well who Max is.
Yes, Max is an Austrian lawyer and activist who set up the NOIB NGO, an organization that does enforcement of privacy and data protection rights in Europe.
So this is a major victory for you.
Yes, we are very happy with the ruling. However, this is the second ruling more or less on the same topic, so to speak. The first ruling that the court made in 2015 basically states the same things. So we are happy that the court reconfirmed its opinion in this ruling.
Reconfirmed its opinion. What are you expecting next?
What we are expecting is a reform of the US surveillance law that would allow the European users to have access to legal remedies against illegal surveillance by the American security agencies. In other cases, we expect that the companies, if it appears too difficult for the American government to reform its law, we expect that the companies who were transferring data from Europe to America until now will just move their servers and the processing activities to safer places, like the European Union, for example.
John Hemings, what are the chances of the U.S. reforming its data privacy laws now?
Well, I think the data laws in the United States are going to have to be looked at again in light of the judicial decision. But I wouldn't say that the debate is over in the United States. But yeah, certainly this decision strikes a tension point in both U.S. government and society.
A tension point? What do you mean?
In the sense that I think the debate over where is the line for privacy of data in the United States isn't resolved. It's still evolving.
Still evolving. And by the way, last Thursday was not a great day for the European Commission. First, it was the European Court of Justice ruling that Apple did not owe 13 billion euros in taxes to the Irish government. Then this ruling that strikes down the deal that was struck, remember, by Brussels with Washington.
I know citizens and businesses are seeking reassurance today on both sides of the Atlantic. So let me be clear, we will continue our work to ensure the continuity of safe data flows.
Axel Lemaire, where does this leave Brussels? Where does this leave Europe?
In an interesting position, which is probably more neutral than the one of the US or China. Europe ends up applying the rule of law. The commissioner that we just, the Commissioner Jourova, she's in charge of values and transparency. And on the other side, in the US, for instance, the people negotiating agreements over data privacy or taxation are from the Department of Commerce. So what Europe did in its judgment on the Privacy Shield and the invalidation of that deal was to assert European values and the importance of respecting privacy and individual rights in an online world. So considering that the American surveillance programs are not guaranteeing individual rights enough.
Are there any concrete and immediate impacts for data users, for citizens on this continent, Axel?
I guess the impact is probably higher on private companies because in the end, consumers are still asked for their consent whenever their personal data are used. But companies will have to question their choices about where they want their data to be stored and whether the transfer of data regarding European citizens is still valid when it is transferred to the US. So the impact on American companies will be big in the short term because they will have to look deeply at their contractual clauses to check that this can be valid according to EU law. And the impact on European companies can be interesting because they might be tempted to repatriate services such as softwares managing human resources or marketing or finance or, you know, history of your online navigation on the internet. So all this is processed in the US at the moment. The data are treated back in North America. That might be an opportunity for for European companies to develop such services more in Europe and to develop data centers and data storage in Europe.
Alex Blumenrosen, as an American in Paris, is this a good news story or a bad news story?
Well, there's a little bit of both today. The bad news is that we have a structure that was created to transfer the data from Europe to the United States that first was under the safe harbor that was declared null and void in 2015. And now we have the second one, which is declared void just last Thursday. And over 5,000 American companies have signed up to this Privacy Shield system, which is now invalid. And they need to find an alternative. Now,
how fast do they need to find it?
I'm sorry?
How fast do they need to find it?
Well, after the safe harbor was declared void in 2015, in France, the Data Protection Authority gave companies about 2 months to find an alternative. Now, the good news is that the European Court of Justice told companies what they should be doing. They upheld the model contract clauses, the standard contract clauses by which companies can agree contractually to abide by and respect European data laws on a contractual basis. And so the European Court of Justice took away the privacy shield, but provided a short-term roadmap until an alternative can be negotiated between Europe and the United States.
Nadim Kobesi, is this, when you listen to Axel Lemaire in particular, is this about, well, creating a, we've been using this term a lot since the start of COVID-19 pandemic, but creating shorter supply chains when it comes to information? Is that good or bad?
Well, in 2010, there was a situation where Twitter received a court order accompanied by a gag order from the United States Department of Justice. And the Department of Justice was requesting access to private messages and to other account information of, I believe, 5 Twitter users, most of which lived in Europe. And when a company that's based in the US, that is incorporated in the US and that has American employees receives such a court order, they have to comply with it if it's a subpoena. And when there's a accompanying gag order, even revealing the existence of such an order becomes a problem. And these people, by the way, were activists who were working on the exact same topics as Edward Snowden, and I believe eventually may have gotten even in touch with Edward Snowden. And if you have a situation where you're able to serve these subpoenas and you're able to serve gag orders with them, and the companies are forced to comply if they're based in the United States and bring up all that data, I don't understand how whether the existence or non-existence of this privacy shield is relevant at all. Because even if your data is harbored in a server based in Europe, a data center based in Europe, or a data center based in the United States, it's still just a factor of where does the employee live? Where does the CEO live? Where is the company incorporated? And these people can be ordered by law to just, SSH into that server or log into that server, and wherever it may be around the world, siphon off the data and comply with local laws and hand it over. So in terms of protecting, I've read in the press that the Privacy Shield story has been interpreted as a way to reinforce privacy adhering, to give privacy adhering nations a better, more central view of the stage or position on the stage. But I don't see how that will have any practical effect if you consider what I just said.
Alex Blumenrosen, your reaction to what you just heard from Nadim?
Yes, well, there's quite a bit of truth to that, but a lot of that is because of recent legislation in the United States. The United States has a law called the Cloud Act that pretty much allows the United States government to go to a Facebook or a Google or a GAFA company, as they're called here, and to request documents, information, personal data that is managed by them, controlled by them, but stored anywhere in the world. And they don't need to go, in many cases, through a court. They don't need to get a warrant. They simply have to say that this is for a surveillance purpose, this is for a counterterrorist purpose, and they can get that data without consulting the foreign country, without consulting courts or foreign affairs ministries in the foreign country. And so,
and to be clear, Nadim is right. It doesn't matter where the data is actually stored.
That's right. Under the Cloud Act, which is this legislative enactment in the United States from 2018, I think it is, and so it's quite recent, they can do that. They couldn't do that before. And I think we need to find, and the countries need to find a way to temper down that wish for extraterritoriality that often comes along with American legislation.
Axel Lemaire, is the problem not simply that, well, the US owns the internet to the degree that we use Facebook all day, we use Instagram, we use WhatsApp, we use Twitter, we use all these social medias that are American, and that until the day that Europeans build their own social medias that can compete, we're going to have to play by US rules no matter what.
Well, I disagree. The services and technological solutions that are used by European consumers should still, depend on European law, at least when these European citizens are based in Europe. And so the privacy shield only concerns European citizens. So yes, it questions the extraterritoriality of American law and its capacity to control data outside of America. But what we're discussing here are the personal data regarding European citizens. And so since they are primarily concerned, I think it's simply the law that is, by the European Commission, the member state, and European Parliament that should apply. And this is exactly what the European Court asserted. So all this sounds very technical and legal, but in the end, I see it as a very political issue. And as long as the US doesn't change its own internal legislation over access to personal data by its intelligence agencies, I don't see how a safe, secure legal environment could be designed between Europe and America. But it is political because remember, President Obama, when he was in power, tried to change the legislation, but had to face the opposition in the Senate. And I remember very well when I was a government minister in France back in 2015 and 16, I opposed the privacy shield because considering that it was too weak, legally speaking. But the European Commission negotiated in a very hasty way and directly with the Department of Trade. And so member states, the European Parliament, and national parliaments were not so much involved in these negotiations. So the question here is, yes, what about the stakes for private companies and their capacity to manage data? But also, what about, liberties and individual freedoms and respect of privacy for individuals as stated by European law? And to me, that is the main question.
Ala Krynitskita brings me back to the question I posed you at the outset. Short of banning GAFAs, short of banning US tech giants, how do EU citizens protect their data?
In our opinion, I completely agree with the previous opinion that the first and foremost reform of the American surveillance law is necessary. It's not only about the US. Some other countries, some other third countries have very strong surveillance powers. And as some of you might know, the UK is now also considering possible scenarios that will happen after the 1st of January 2021 when the UK will leave the European Union. As we all know, the UK belongs to the Five Eyes organization, and they might have problems with getting the adequacy decision from the European Commission next year too. We recommend that companies reconsider their practices, their processing operations, that they either base all the processing in the European Union or in other safe countries, as I mentioned before. If this is not possible, then they should use strong encryption of personal data, both of the personal data as well as the metadata that comes along with the substance of the transfers. And we will propose more options based on the current situation and on the analysis of what the regulators are putting forward, and based on the CGU decision. And we will publish such possible options on our website soon, today or tomorrow. As the first step, we propose that companies contact their partners in the US, raising several questions, namely whether a company, their American partner, falls under the US surveillance laws, whether the company can qualify as the electronic communication service provider. And based on these questions, any company may also require their partners to stop processing personal data coming from the European Union. As the third step, also citizens and users may send requests to their to the companies which services they use and raise similar questions and raise questions whether they have ever received any requests from the US authorities regarding the possible surveillance of the European data.
All right, so let me bring in John Hemings on these points. Your reaction, first of all, to that list of measures which sound like creating a shield against, well, effectively, what was revealed by Edward Snowden, which is mass spying on the part of U.S. intelligence services.
So, having been asked to come on to the show and discuss 5G and the UK situation with Huawei and 5G network architecture, I'm probably not the best person to ask with regards to it. The only thing I will say is that I see a lot of the same debate with data that is occurring between the EU and US with the People's Republic of China, PRC, but at a much greater extent. So,
crucial to that is there's always the lingering question in people's minds, John Hemings, which is how much of it, and it is a political problem, right? How much of it is really about basic liberties, fundamental rights, and how much of it is, well, business rivalries, right? We ask that question when it comes to Huawei, and we ask that question when it comes to the fact that, as I said earlier, the US not only owns the internet, but to a large degree owns the cloud where all that data is stored.
So there's certainly a technology rivalry, which I would describe as the kind of two great powers that are aiming to build the data infrastructure of the future, which will give enhanced state power. 5G will be the backbone of big data analytics, the fourth industrial revolution, and the Internet of Things. But in terms of what I do think the difference between the US and the PRC on this is the extent to which the debate is still happening in the United States. That debate is finished in the PRC, and the social flexibility that people have in China in terms of their own data is so much more limited. And so I think when we compare them, it's useful to think about that.
But again, I'm struck, John, about you making that parallel, saying it sounds like a lot like the argument we're having about Europe and the US sounds a lot like the argument we're having about the US and China. What does that tell you?
Well, it tells you that data is the big issue for, I think, I'll tell you what it tells you. It tells you that data and the technologies around data are going to enhance the pillars of state power. They are also becoming more penetrative and invasive in our lives. Just think, all of us during this COVID, how much time we've been teleworking on Zoom and all these other things. And as we are now all speaking to each other from miles away from each other. Digital currencies, there's just so many new technologies that are being enhanced by greater broadband and 5G capabilities, including telemedicine, self-driving vehicles, the whole panoply. And there's so many trillions of dollars riding on it. So I do see there's a rivalry between the US and the PRC in that. But I don't think the 5G issue is specifically about the Americans aiming to have business dominance, because there is no American 5G champion. I mean, there are Nokia and Ericsson and Samsung, so Korean, Finnish, and Swedish. I think for the Americans, the 5G issue in the UK is very, very specifically security oriented.
Very specifically security oriented. Are we mixing apples and oranges, Axel Lemaire?
I agree that in Huawei's case, what is at stake seems to be more political in the sense that it's really governments trying to mix other strategic interests with the state of technology. So 5G will be an enabler of hard and soft power, clearly, and this is what is at stake. I think Europe's position in that respect should be more neutral and should be about applying, again, the rule of law and the European standards. And this is under those conditions that foreign companies should be given access to the European market and to the data of 500 million customers. But in the case of Huawei, the number 2 possible competitor is European. It's either Nokia or Ericsson. They're far behind, innovatively speaking, and more expensive for the moment. But what is important is also from a very neutral positioning to be able to offer an open internet and open technologies that allow for spaces and for everyone, including competitors. I think nobody wants to be dependent on one single technology, especially when it relates to national security, but also, digital health, for instance, which is something that the 5G can bring, or very, very fast broadband connectivity. So what countries should keep in mind is the importance of allowing for an open technological and business environment where multiple competitors can play their card.
Can it be open when you're dealing with Huawei, which gets its roots in the Chinese military?
Well, I think if Huawei could display that kind of openness, including to the security regulators in other countries, that would be their number 1 argument to be able to sell 5G equipment. So probably non-core network, but anyhow, the capability to open up their own technologies will be a question probably of life or death for a company like Huawei. So they have an interest to try to keep out of the big strategic political questions, and if they really want to maintain their business.
All right, and we saw the big stories of last week. We talked about that ruling concerning privacy and US servers. But the other big story, and we heard our panelists allude to it last week, was the UK saying that from 2027, there'd be no more Huawei 5G technology in the UK. Claire Rush has that story.
It's a decision rife with geopolitical implications that could set back the rollout of 5G by several years and cost up to £2 billion. On Tuesday, the UK moved to ban Huawei from its 5G network and to remove all of its existing equipment by 2027.
The best way to secure our networks is for operators to stop using new affected Huawei equipment. So to be clear, from the end of this year, telecoms operators must not buy any 5G equipment from Huawei.
Only a few months ago, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson agreed to grant the Chinese telecoms giant a limited role in building the country's 5G network. But now London has backtracked amid growing pressure, both domestic and foreign. That foreign pressure coming largely from the US, which views Huawei as an agent of the Chinese government. Washington recently imposed sanctions on companies working with the telecoms giant and threatened to cut security cooperation with the UK if it continued dealing with the firm. Now it seems that Washington's international pressure campaign is starting to pay off. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has hailed London's decision to drop Huawei, while China has condemned it. Its ambassador to the UK in a tweet calling it disappointing and wrong and accusing the UK of treating foreign businesses unfairly. The move comes amid growing tensions between the UK and China. The two countries have been at odds over Beijing's treatment of Uyghur Muslims, and more recently over its new Hong Kong security law, which has been heavily criticized by Downing Street.
Yeah, Western social media giants who are seriously considering leaving Hong Kong. Nadine Kobesi, what was your reaction when you heard that story?
The story about China or?
The story about the UK and Huawei.
Right. I think the United States and the UK both are concerned or profess a concern towards Huawei that has to do with security issues, largely a lacking security posture in Huawei products, which don't seem to be engineered with a high security standard. This is not to say that they intentionally introduce weaknesses, but that they don't necessarily spend the requisite effort to rule them out, and also Huawei's susceptibility to influence by the Chinese state. That being said, if you look at the situation more closely, there are two things at play here. The first is that any nation with a local telecommunications giant that is able to export critical network infrastructure will end up gaining some control over that infrastructure. And in fact, if you look at the Snowden documents, you will see that the exact fears that are being projected upon Huawei by the US and the UK and other members of the Five Eyes alliance are using or have relied in the past on the same techniques by exploiting market dominance of these critical hardware systems that are being used to provide internet and networking all over the world. One famous case, for example, is the BeSafe algorithm that was rolled out. There were also backdoors in the Juniper Networks devices and VPNs. So this is just perhaps a matter of projection. And at the same time, there is very much a competitive element. If you look beyond Huawei, if you look at the US, banning Huawei devices from using Google software on their phones, or Intel doing business with some of these companies, or even banning companies that aren't very related to Huawei, such as ZTE, which is another smartphone manufacturer. It does seem like there is a severe fear, perhaps justified, but a bit premature, that there could be a significant challenge to the technical supremacy of the US when it comes to owning and rolling out the hardware for the internet, separate from actually owning the cloud, as you say, and the internet itself.
Alex Blumenrosen, you agree?
I do, but I see that
this is more about market share than it is about.
No, it's not. It's not just about market share. It's certainly about who owns the internet and what happens to the data that comes out of the internet. But the situation vis-a-vis Europe, of the United States, and of China are not the same, and we can't. Putting them in the one basket would be mixing up apples and oranges. The United States is a European ally and is a liberal democracy. There are checks and balances. There are elections. China is not. And so that difference, and I'm not saying that this difference is determinative, but it needs to inform the debate and the negotiations between the various countries. And so the debate over privacy between Europe and China will be very different from the debate with the United States.
Is it possible to respond?
Sure.
Thank you. I do agree that the United States is not rounding up Uyghur Muslims or engaging in an organ harvesting trade that's been up for 2 decades, or doing any of the things that the Chinese Communist Party is responsible for. And it is a very, very worrying thing if that country becomes in any way close to being a determinative or a superpower that exports culture that has a lot of soft power, which is something that China does not have even close to the US right now. But let's look at the actual pragmatics as they pertain to this particular situation. The Cloud Act of 2018 that you mentioned earlier started when Microsoft received a subpoena from the US government to hand over emails that were being used by the Microsoft Outlook service. Microsoft refused, saying that because the email servers that Microsoft controlled were located in Ireland, then the court order that was given to them had no jurisdiction, could not apply. During this case, which was being argued by Microsoft and the US government in front of the US Supreme Court, so it was a case that could have a lot of ramifications because it's the highest court in the land. During that argument in the Supreme Court, the Cloud Act was passed in the middle of it. And so the court vacated the prior decisions and said that the point didn't matter anymore. And so, yes, the process is different technically. You do end up with immeasurably more room for debate. And the starting point, or the legacy from which Western democracies approach pretty much any problem, is markedly different and more noble and better off for the entire world than the Chinese Communist Party. But pragmatically, practically, If you look at the results, all it took was a bit more arguing. And then in the middle of Microsoft actually arguing a case and trying to set a noble precedent in front of the Supreme Court, we get this law that's passed that stops the entire judicial process, and as far as courts are involved, that is, and makes it such that, well, the law's changed right in the middle, and after we served you that court order, right after we served you that subpoena, and now you just have to hand over the data in Ireland. So I think that the only way we can protect data is through encryption. We need to have better end-to-end encryption. We need to have stronger systems. If you use WhatsApp today, you're actually benefiting from end-to-end encryption on all of your messages, all of your calls, and they cannot be intercepted, at least without serious effort or some unknown cryptographic attack by governments. The same applies for FaceTime, iMessage, Google Duo, a whole ton of services. And so maybe we should just trust the math, because here in Europe, we have a lot of over-reliance on legislation. Because of historical reasons, we seem to think that it works every time, all the time. And also, when everything looks like a nail and you only have when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So I think we have to focus more on the technology. We have to look at the precedent that's been set by end-to-end encrypted applications such as WhatsApp, really big services that have proven they can be used by people all around the world. And this is the solution. We need to stop talking about law and talk about what we can change regarding the actual engineering that can actually provide concrete, irrefutable guarantees.
You hear that, Axel Lemaire? Regulation in the end won't really work all that much.
Well, I've heard that many times. It's just that regulation is actually voted by parliaments, and it's what is at stake is the functioning of democracies, right? So, I mean, I'm totally favorable to full encryption. That's not the question. But I think the question is, to what extent can governments ask for limitations on encryption? And my personal opinion is to say, well, to a very limited extent. But this is what is at stake. We can't just ignore that these questions need to be addressed in a political context. So this I think is a pretty dangerous argument. Maybe one extra question that I wanted to add to the debate is about when it comes to China, but the US as well. Europe's position is interesting, because what European countries and the European Commission question is the level playing field. So in the case of Huawei, for instance, is it normal to open up European markets to these Chinese companies when China supports through state aids and a very proactive industrial policy back in China that company in ways and circumstances that are probably not equal compared with European companies? So this whole Huawei story is also an occasion for the European regulators and legislators to try to define a business environment where the level playing field, the equality between economic actors would be more respected. But what is fascinating in all these questions is how security issues, individual rights, and business challenges are totally intertwined, because this is what data is about, right? It raises challenges around these three topics. So I think these questions should be addressed at a multilateral level, except that multilateralism is really in a bad shape at the moment. So a lot of the answers to these questions, I think, will depend on the outcome of the presidential election in the United States. So depending on...
Do you think so? Or do you think it'll be really, or do you think it will be very different if Joe Biden's elected?
Oh, I think it can be. It can be. There could be a change in American legislation, and there could be probably a willingness to soften the trade war and to get back into more normalized relationships with other countries, and be very firm on separate issues relating to human rights and individual freedoms, for instance. I mean, again, from my political experience, I did see a big change between President Obama's mandate and President Trump's mandate. So it might sound bizarre to think that the future of the internet relies on that presidential election, but this is very much related.
John Hemings, you agree?
I disagree, and actually, I'm quite surprised that you mention human rights, because you also mentioned in the same breath market access to what you admit is a subsidized, heavily subsidized telecommunications company directed by the People's Republic of China. And we know from ASPI, the Australian think tank, that Huawei has been involved in developing the surveillance system in Xinjiang, which has been, enabled to oppress the people. So it's very difficult to square.
No, but the question that's being asked here is there going to be a difference in the United States' position whether Donald Trump is in the White House or Joe Biden is in the White House?
So I am trying to figure that out myself on China, because that's of deep interest to me. I think there'll be nuances, but frankly, I think if you look at the Munich conference last year, you saw Democrats and Republicans, very, very rarely agree on anything, shoulder to shoulder on Huawei and on China. We had Nancy Pelosi and Mark Esper who agreed across the line.
More broadly, if the United States, again, owns a lot of the data or owns access to the data, will they agree to more regulation, whoever's in the White House?
I think the more important thing is the ITU and what's happening with the PRC. I mean, the PRC is becoming one of the great digital superpowers, and to assume that the Americans own the internet, as you guys have mentioned a couple of times. I mean, Huawei has a great representation in the International Telecommunications Union. They're promoting new internet protocols, which is very cutting edge and supposedly will help more authoritarian types of data capture. They've also passed their own cybersecurity law in 2017, which not only do they require the types of things that we've heard a little bit from the US side, but also that the data stored inside the PRC. So I think we have to look at those things as well as the US election to think about what's going to happen.
We're running short on time. Alex Blumenrosen?
So I think a Biden presidency would be quite different. Remember, the United States historically is a poster child for multilateralism. We have spent in the United States the last 70 years putting together a variety of coalitions and alliances to address military, security, agricultural, telecommunications issues. It's what we do. The last 4 years, including the period of the adoption of the Cloud Act, is an aberration to my mind, and things can get better.
But if Silicon Valley is unbridled, if you will, currently, why should it agree? Why should the U.S. agree to?
We have great processes for exchanging information, for communicating, for negotiating agreements. We did it for the safe harbor. We did it for the privacy shield. The EU Commission once a year goes and does an adequacy decision report. All of the discussion mechanisms are in place, and we just need to push that a little further. We're not very far apart, in my mind.
Nadim Qubaisi?
I think that these are national security issues. I think that the tradition for surveillance strategy and national security strategy has been the same under Obama as it has been under Trump when it comes to surveillance, when it comes to the issues that are relevant to what we're discussing here, maybe not immigration or anything else. I think it is very odd and ahistorical to consider that if Biden is elected or whoever is elected, if Bernie Sanders is elected, that there would be any difference. These are issues that are presented to the President of the United States as matters of national security that cannot be affected by ideology or concerns for human rights or concerns for anything other than the raw security and strategic positioning of the United States around the world. We haven't seen these change under Bush, under Obama, under specifically surveillance under Trump. I don't think the Cloud Act is actually a result of the Trump administration at all. If you look at the Snowden documents, it's pretty obvious that all this stuff was happening way before.
Didn't even have time to talk about TikTok, but I hopefully can do it again soon. So much to say and so little time. I want to thank you so much, Nadim Kobesi. I want to thank Ala Kurchenitsa for being with us from Vienna, Axel Lemaire, Alex Blumenrosen, and John Hemings in Honolulu. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. There's much more on our website, france24.com. Bye for now.
Some of the world's most influential people talk to France 24.
Government cannot do much promotion of human value.
Politicians.
E acho que sem política não há democracia.
Scientists, athletes and artists.
Nous les femmes, si on se serre les coudes, on peut vraiment avoir une action très très positive sur le monde.
The American Film Festival in Deauville.
Get all the insight.
The government is still spying.
And the voices that matter on France 24.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
En France 24 nos esforzamos por brindar la mejor información hecha por periodistas de Latinoamérica y del resto del mundo.
We look at how technology is shaping the future, and we show you the latest gadgets you can soon get your hands on.
نقدم لكم الاقتصاد بطريقة مختلفة، نبسط المفاهيم والمصطلحات كي تكتمل الصورة لديكم.
Aquí puedo hablar de medio ambiente, no solo de los problemas que afectan a nuestro planeta, sino también de iniciativas y soluciones que a veces no tienen espacio en televisión.
La différence sur France 24, c'est l'idée du reportage. Nos grands reportages, vous ne les verrez nulle part ailleurs.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.